begin by welcoming you all and Dylan Patrick here this evening to the Ray Center Speaker Series. Tonight, Dylan, who is a musician and writer, and among other things, and the founder of Holistic Impact Foundation, which is an organization that the Ray Center is spending some time with. More on that soon. Tonight, he's going to speak to us about the relationship between education, human development, and sustainable solutions. And we're really excited to have you joining us here from Munich. And it's all you.
Great. Well, thank you, Leah. And I'm very excited to be able to speak on the Ray Center's weekly series. I hope to speak in person. This is a new experience for me, doing a lecture virtually. But I mean, how amazing is that, people, you can cover so much more distance and be able to speak with so many people from different areas, having this opportunity. So that's the silver lining of having the COVID business. I'm going to bring up, can everybody see what I just shared on my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, then let's get started. I want you to imagine a problem. It can be simple, it can be complex, it could be having to get your kids out of the house, in the car, into school on time. It could be climate change. It could be, how do we improve our education system? Now, I want you to think about how many times we have to revisit challenges because we haven't figured out a way to solve them in a sustainable way. And that can be frustrating, and that can increase the cost, both of our time, our energy, and our finances, when we have to continuously readdress issues that are a problem for us. And especially when we get to that upper tier of challenges like education and the environment, the longer it takes us to solve them in a sustainable way, the more those problems expand and grow. And when they come back, they sometimes come back in a metastasized way. They're even harder to deal with. And so while we're together for the next little bit, and we're going to talk about some things, we're going to explore the relationship between three critical factors that we need to keep our mind and our focus on so that we can help build thriving people and thriving communities. And that's, like Leah said, it's education, human development, and sustainable solutions. Now, people are the root driver of solutions. What does that mean? That means tools are incredibly important, resources are incredibly important, but people are the catalyst of actually achieving a solution, because it is how we process information, it is how we analyze a problem, and it's how we make decisions about applying the tools that we have that really come and help us figure out a way to solve a problem. And right now, we live in a time with unprecedented access to technology and resources. And we live in a time where things that we're using today, they were once science fiction. We're working and living in a time when, because of all of these really flashy and amazing achievements, we've kind of lost sight of that fundamental root, right? And that's human development. That's how do we help people maximize their potential, which means how do we also help maximize our tools and resources? And so we have to start by thinking about ourselves as problem solvers. And that's something we all share, regardless of our religious background, regardless of our profession, our age, we're all problem solvers. Like I said in the beginning, when we're thinking about the challenges we face as individuals on a daily basis, we have to also consider the fact that the thing we all share is we're working to solve those problems. And that means we have to think creatively, act critically, and also with agility, because we live in a time when the world's moving at such an incredibly fast pace that things we knew yesterday, they might be different tomorrow because new information is constantly coming in. And so we have to be able to process that. Now I know everybody's muted, but can I get a thumbs up or a wave if we're following along so far? Normally in lectures, okay, all right, the hands are moving. All right, this is a little different. I'm used to the live, give and take, but we're getting there. Problem solved. So nice work, everybody. Sometimes what we need has been there all along. Now, what does that mean? When I started working on this problem of trying to understand how to create sustainable solutions, because that's what my foundation works on, I started looking at what already existed, because I believe that there are some amazing things already there. And, if we can think back to chemistry class or biology class, and we think about ecosystems and how things are built, a lot of times it's a reshaping of the things that exist around us that actually help us get where we want to go. And so I looked at what are the tools that we already have. And what I found was we had education, sustainable solutions, and human development. And those were the three areas that kept coming up in the research I was doing as being really important. And so then I tried to figure out what their relationship was. Education is a platform that's incredible. It's there, it exists. But what's important is to change how we think about education, because it doesn't begin or end as a little child when you go in the first grade or when you graduate from high school or college or university. Education needs to be something that we think about as always happening, always going on. It is not confined to a school. What I try to promote is the idea of being an eternal student, someone who's constantly learning, someone who's looking with a curious mind at things, trying to think, how can I do this better? How can I improve? How can I learn? And so that's one of the first areas that I looked at was what's the relationship we have with education? And then I looked at, okay, so we're in school, we're learning, there's some incredibly talented teachers, there's passionate parents, there's students that really enjoy being in school. But we also have to look at what is the goal of education. And I've found that it's become more and more specialized. It's become more and more a process of teaching what to think. And so because I'm always looking to try to find a way to make things better and to make them more effective, I asked myself, well, what could we adjust? And I found that we have kind of gotten away from human development. We've gotten to a point where we're teaching people a step-by-step formula to achieve a certain goal. And that's good. But we also need to be able to teach people how to function in an agile way, to be able to function when the formula breaks down, because we all know a plan is great, but eventually something's not going to go quite as we were hoping. And that's when the real challenge arises. That's when we have to dig into who we are and how we think, and then have to figure out where we want to go from there. And that's the gap right now that I'm finding in my research in education is, we're moving in the right direction, but we've gotten away from teaching those fundamental skills, qualities, and processes. And so we have to really look at human development as an essential, all-encompassing area in our lives. And what do I mean by human development? Human development for me and in our format that we're working with and exploring in our research is a process that is helping build the people that we need to succeed in the future. And I'd like to visit a quote by Howard Gardner. He is a professor at Harvard, and he's done extensive work on understanding multiple intelligences. That's probably what he's most famous for. He also wrote a book called The Disciplined Mind, that explores how we engage with the world, and putting forward a plan, a roadmap for a different way of looking at education. And he says we need to focus on the kind of human beings we want to have and the kind of society in which we want to live. And that's a quote that I always revisit when I'm thinking about human development. Who are the people that we want to have as our future? Who are the people we want to be? Because we can always better ourselves and we can always improve how we're functioning. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, helping people reach that next level of performance. Now, sometimes it's easier to look at things because I've been talking about education and human development are big subjects. And we're going to be narrowing down towards the idea of sustainable solutions, but a formula sometimes is helpful to break that down. So if we think about education plus people times our tools and resources, a lot of times that leads to temporary relief because it's missing something. It's missing human development. But if we have education plus human development times people, times tools and resources, that leads to sustainable solutions. And that is that critical piece that we can't leave out. Because in our education system, where students are learning about specific subjects and how to work, if we can find a way to incorporate, plug in a human development model that focuses on fundamental skills, qualities, and processes, then we'll be able to enhance that education system and improve performance in school, work, and life. Now, it's important when we think about education, again, to not confine it to the school space, because right now in jobs, regardless of the field, there's a lot of emphasis on training. And that's where I also see it as a very relevant way to plug in that human development model, to focus on helping people improve how they are problem solvers, because the economy is changing, the workforce is changing. When I got out of college and my first job, it was 2008 when I graduated, and the economy took a downturn. And so I had to make adjustments, and I ended up working road construction. I built roads, and there was so much problem solving in that. If we had had a training model, we would have been even better at the job that we were doing. And so there isn't a limit to who or what needs to be refining their human abilities to engage, think, and act. Whether we're an artist looking at a blank canvas and we're wondering, how are we going to create what's in our mind onto that canvas? Whether we're a musician and there's sounds moving in our mind and we have to find a way to articulate that to people so that it makes sense to them. Whether we're cooking dinner, it doesn't matter. We always have to be able to find a way to come up with a solution to the challenge that's in front of us. And if we think differently about our education system, which includes trainings and workshops for adults, we're going to be able to achieve very, very important steps in the short term and the long term. Because there's no magic pill, there's no switch to flip, it is us. So often right now, there's a lot of, I call it marketing lessons. We try to solve a really complex problem in a clever slogan. I think that's nice to bring attention to a subject, but I think we have to go a step further. And we have to really spend time on what really matters, and that's developing people. And again, people are the driver of solutions. Tools and resources, they're fantastic, but people determine the outcomes. And we have to look at ourselves and hold ourselves accountable for being those drivers, those forces for realizing our goals and solving those problems. And that means we have to be thinking about how to improve how we function. So Michael Legault wrote a book called Think, and he explores the role of thinking, where it is at. He does a lot of research and surveys with colleges, universities, lower grade schools, people in the workforce. And sharp, incisive, clever thinking is steadily becoming a lost art, is one of the things he found. And when I read that, I thought, this is a problem. Because, and it's something that we see very often. Instead of processing information in a way that we can do something productive with it, a lot of times we get overwhelmed with information. We make rash decisions. We tend to get more emotional than rational. And so if we can improve people's thinking, we're going to be able to enhance performance outside of the classroom. Our daily lives will improve. And again, when people are empowered and are thriving, communities will thrive. And that's an important distinction and an important goal, because we're all in this together, is what I keep finding out in the research we're doing. The more I'm learning about how people work, the more I'm learning about how much we need to work together and how much we're in this together. Again, that unifying quality is that we're all problem solvers and we're on the same team. We have different roles. And as long as we perform those roles, we're going to get where we want to go. So let's talk about human development. And as I said, Howard Gardner has been a key focus in our research because of his theories on multiple intelligences, which in a very short, basic way is everybody has different learning styles and different triggers, different markers that will make their mind open up to information. And so that's something that I'm very cognizant of when I'm working with people. And it's something that I think in a everyday life sort of way is going to help people connect with others more. Because if I can understand that someone is going to be processing this information differently than me, then maybe I'll understand that I need to change how I say it. And then I can cut down on frustration and maximize that learning experience. And through all of this work, when I talk about human development, I often talk about the fundamentals, because I believe in fundamentals from when I was playing sports. I wasn't a flashy player, but I always thought that if I could just have that fundamental baseline, I'll be able to have a purpose on the team. And so when I was doing research and building a human development model that's at the core of my foundation, I boiled everything down to 3 steps. It's a 3-step process that we all need to share, and that's engage, think, and act. Most people consider thinking. We all think and we all tend to act. But I question whether we could think in a more effective way and then act in a more efficient way. And that involves engaging. And so what do I mean by engage? That means that we interact with subjects, disciplines, challenges, the information that we're taking in a way that we're able to identify root causation, purpose, and then identify essential qualities of that information. Simply put, it means that we really actually understand what we're thinking about, because then we're going to be able to analyze that information, think in a creative way, which means maybe we'll see a different angle. And so maybe we won't exist in a closed circle and keep banging our head on the wall and saying, why does this keep happening to me? And more importantly, we're going to be able to evaluate the tools that are available to us in such a way that we'll be able to apply them more effectively. So if we're going to engage with a problem or a challenge or information, that means we're going to be able to understand it a lot better. And if we can understand why that challenge is there, we can think more deeply about it. And that's going to improve how we act upon it. Now, the act step of this three-step process means that we transform our analysis of a problem into critical action. And that means acting decisively, and this is the important part, but it also means you evaluate consistently. So every time I have an action, I need to consider whether it was effective, whether it needs to be improved. I also need to consider if sometimes that action is asking another question. Sometimes the best choice we can make for an action is to do nothing and to consider asking another question, like, why did that happen again? Or if I have to go back to the beginning of the process, because I think a lot of times, and myself included, we get caught up in the forward momentum idea. We have to get ahead, we have to push through, and we miss that vital thing that we have to give ourselves, which is permission to say, whoop, stop, I need to take a step back, I need to evaluate if this makes sense, and do I need more information? And that's something that's very important, and one of the mistakes that we make when problem solving, because the goal, and goals are very important, the goal is creating a solution that removes the problem. That's our goal. That should be the goal. And if that's the goal, then we need to do whatever it takes to reach that goal. And so if it takes a little bit more time, but it's more effective in the long term, that's going to be where we want to go. I have to move these lovely faces out of the way, because so if we do engage, think, act, the outcome that I'm finding in the research we're doing is you will maximize individual performance. You'll maximize tools and resources like education, art, technology, and information. You'll enhance information processing and engagement with the world and ourselves. And you'll be able to enhance implementation and action of the tools that we have. And what I think is the most important thing is you're going to develop thinkers, problem solvers, creators, innovators, and leaders that we need going forward in the future, whether it's children who will grow up to meet these necessary roles, or whether it's people in the middle of their life who realize what they're fully capable of. Because I think the secret is we're not maxing out what we already have. We have tools that we're not using the full potential. We're not tapping into our full talent pool. And so we can unlock that. We just have to take the time to develop those skills that allow us to. Now let's move to the final component. So we have education, which is an amazing platform that's, let's think of it as an infrastructure of development. We have human development that shifts our focus from teaching what to think to teaching how to think, and giving people those fundamental skills and qualities. And when you combine those two, you have a really powerful mechanism to empower people. And not empower people in a philosophical sense, but to empower people in a really practical way, making them those problem solvers that we were imagining in the very beginning of this conversation. And so now we need to talk about sustainable solutions, because there's an important difference between treating symptoms and achieving a sustainable solution. I grew up hiking. I still hike to this day. I'm hoping to go hiking this weekend. And if you're in the mountains, you'll know about what a false summit is. And for anyone who doesn't know, a false summit is when you're going up a peak and you feel like you're getting really close, and you get to the top and you think, I did it, I can sit down now. But what you realize is when you get to that peak, it's a false summit, which means you still have a ways to go. There's still a climb to make because you didn't quite get there. And a lot of times when we focus only on symptoms, which is necessary, I do not want to give the impression, I do not think that symptoms need to be treated. They do, but we have to have a balance. We have to have a balance that focuses on that root driver that root causation as well. So right now we have a lot of organizations and people focusing on symptoms. We also need to have people who are focusing on developing that core catalyst that's actually going to drive us to a sustainable solution and get us past that false summit. Because if we settle only for those symptoms, we're faking ourselves out a little bit, because there's more to do. We need to go further. And so the way I like to think about a sustainable solution is sometimes looking backwards is the fastest way forwards. So again, if we see a symptom, instead of saying, how do I fix that symptom? Maybe take a step back and say, what caused that symptom? And then ask another question. What would it take to fix that causation? And then you can work your way back further and further, and you keep asking yourself these questions until you find out what the root cause of the challenge is. Because again, our goal needs to be solving the challenge, having a sustainable solution to the challenge, not just the symptom. And so that's how we need to think about sustainable solutions. And that's the key difference, because we can have a solution, but whether or not it's sustainable or not depends on how we break it down. And so I explain here that to build a sustainable solution, we need to deconstruct challenges and work backwards from the consequences of a problem to address and engage the causation and driver of solutions. I propose that we can do that by adjusting our entry point to the problem. So instead of having a direct attack on the symptoms, like I was saying, let's take a step back and focus on people, because people are the common denominator shared by challenges, they're shared by solutions, and they're the access point. So when we go into a school and we develop a curriculum that is focused on human development and incorporating that with more traditional structure, or we go into a business or an organization or an art community and we help develop through those conduits the human development model, we're tapping into the root. So if we want to get medicine to the whole body really quickly, right into the heart, you know? And so that's kind of the idea. If you want to fix complicated problems, I think that we might get there faster, more effectively, if we engage the factor that is going to be working on those problems, and that's people. Now, what could this look like? How's everybody doing? This is the funniest thing. Okay, we're still waving. We're still there. Okay. Thank you. This is the funniest thing. What could this look like? Everything we've been talking about. And so I've developed a flow, and just to help walk through it. So if we have human development, we can empower people. If we empower people, they'll maximize their tools and their resources and their talent, and they'll be able to think creatively and act critically, which will be the difference in how we use the tools and resources that we have. And then that will lead to sustainable solutions. Whoa, sorry, touchy mouse. Now, the reason sustainable solutions are so important, and we touched on it a little bit, but I want to make sure that we have a really clear understanding on it, is there's always going to be another challenge waiting. You know, there isn't a finite stack of challenges, and if we get through them, we're good, and that's it. I think if 2020 taught us anything, it's that we're going to have, there's always, in theater, they call it the wings. There's always another challenge waiting in the wings. And so we have to figure out a way to actually remove challenges and solve them in a way that they don't come back. Because every time that a challenge is still there, that's more resources being devoted to it that could be getting applied to a new challenge. that's decreasing the effectiveness of the people working on it because it's exhausting to keep tackling the same challenges over and over again. And ultimately, sustainable solutions, and this is my personal goal, that's how you break the cycle of passing challenges on to future generations. I think, when I talk to people, one of the greatest frustrations is how are we still dealing with this? How are we still talking about this? And that can be, wildly frustrating, and it can be depressing. And I think that if we change our format and if we change our approach, we can get there. We don't have to break everything down and start from the beginning because we have really amazing aspects already in place. But if we just shift the focus, if we shift our priority, the order of operations, if you will, then we're going to be able to work with what we already have and get there faster. I think it comes from a place sometimes of not fully understanding what the problem is. And so you have to do something. And so people will start from the beginning because they don't know what else to do. And so it comes from a good place. But if we work through our engage, think, act model, people are going to be able to make those decisions and see that big picture, small picture, more effectively. I'd like to ask, can we ask if people have questions? Because I just want to, I know we've talked about a lot of things and it's not.
I got to get her off of mute if you want to ask a question. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say if you're at a point, Dylan, that it makes sense that we have a little bit of conversation before we continue anymore. Absolutely. So it's in this format. I can view gallery and I can see most folks. But if you can raise a hand, or if you're not on video, you can send a note in the chat. But definitely, yeah, you've presented a fair amount of information. So I see.
And normally there'd be the flow of, if someone had a question. I just didn't know how to do that with the.
Dylan, it's terrible. I do reading for little kids 2.5 years old on Zoom, and I hate it because nobody looks at it and I have no audience.
Well, I saw that Charles made a move forward, and then I see that my mother is waving, so she can be the second person in there, and then I'll scroll back through. So go ahead, Charles, and then.
Am I unmuted then?
You are.
Okay, good. So I'm thinking about, it seems, Dylan, that you're assuming an inherent goodness to people, which is nice, but not always what we find to be the case. So A can lead to B, can lead to C, can lead to D, which is sustainable solutions, which means a lot to me. But instead of leading to sustainable solutions, maybe many people would see the goal as maximizing profit or maximizing political gain. So how do these steps, do we just assume that there's an inherent goodness? How do we have a sense of values that are shared by the greater population to achieve this kind of goodness?
So that's a great question. And I've been around the world quite a bit, and I've had an opportunity to see people in a lot of different conditions. And there are certainly, I'm not saying, I don't know if there's an inherent goodness in everybody, but I do know that if we spend time working on developing people in an active kind of way, I think that you can help develop people. I think it's something you can develop. It's a process. And so I can't speak to whether or not there's an inherent goodness or not. I haven't met everybody yet. And I think that you have to meet someone to really make that call. But I do think that it's a really great question, because it just shows when you have a really big question like that and there's a broad, implication, you have to focus on something small that you can build your way up to. I did a lot of target practice when I was a kid, and they always said aim small, miss small. So if you aim for the smallest point on the target, you're maybe going to miss by a little bit. But if you just look at the whole target, you're going to miss the whole thing. And so if you're going to address a problem, again, boiling it down. So if you want inherent goodness in people, well, if we want to boil down, you deal with the factors that So it's kind of like I was a reporter for a little while, and when you're building a story, you get some information, and then if you're a good reporter, you follow it up and you keep following it up until you figure out what the real truth of the story is. What I'm talking about is a lot like that. And so if we want to help people maximize their potential and make decisions that are balanced and fair, I think you're going to be closer to that goal if you teach them the fundamental skills and qualities that allow them to get there. We can't force people to consider, it's, you can't force people to consider the implications. In the news today, it's a lot of things have been happening on the market, right? You can't force people to make a decision that's going to be fair for everybody. But if you develop people's ability to process information and value rational decision making, I think you're going to get there faster. I'm a big proponent of teaching philosophy in school. I think that, and I would do it in a way where you're not looking at it as reading a bunch of texts that are very complicated to read.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Okay. I just want to take issue with your basic premise.
Sure.
Okay. I'm old and cynical.
Yep.
And
No, you're old and beautiful.
yeah, right. I'm old and cynical. And professionally, I worked in a very pragmatic kind of field where you had to go from the simple to the complex, and you had to be pragmatic and functional and deal with people. Okay. So this is what I take issue with.
Okay.
In order to have a sustainable solution, I agree. In a very finite situation, you can teach somebody how to go from the simple to the complex. You can appeal to their decency, their morality, their ethics, and you can teach how to deal with a problem and be just fine. But there's an end to that. Human development is if somebody takes over that situation when you either retire or you die or you move or whatever, and people take over it, they then have to go through the same developmental stages that you went when you first started. For instance, if you're having an organization, I don't care if it's an organization having to do with a church or a synagogue or a political organization, a group, or a theater group, or any kind of organization. People start and they form it and they do it and they solve the problem and everything's hunky-dory and wonderful, and they decide, they figure out what works and what doesn't work and who to trust and who not to trust and everything. Then they go away and they retire and they die, and other people have to come and take over the organization. And guess what? They start at the beginning, because as far as they're concerned, the sustainable solution that the former group came up with is not good. They want to do it their way.
Sure.
That's the reality. That's all I have to say.
No, that's fine. And in cynicism, that just means you ask a lot of questions, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think what you're talking about is what happens a lot of times. And what I'm saying is, if we incorporate actually teaching people how to go through that engage, think, act process, that's a way to teach people how to think more with.
But the new group has to start from the beginning. That's what human development is. They don't start at the place
Well,
where the
so-
former group ended.
Yeah, so just give me 1 second. So the big thing is they don't have, so that's assuming that we don't get ahead of the curve. And so that's why I talk a lot with schools, right? So if we're teaching young people how to think more creatively, more with agility, then you're going to be a better problem solver. And so you're not going to be stuck in closed circuits. So what you're describing is what does happen a lot. And that's because we're not teaching people how to break out of that closed circuit thinking, and, you know, not learning how to actually embrace change and find a way to maximize that opportunity.
No, people want to do things their own way. It's my
Sure.
organization, and I'm
that's-
not going to do what you did.
Right, but that's okay. I'm not opposed
No, it's
to it.
not. I want them to learn from what the people did before them, but they don't.
Right, but that's where you have to teach them that, right? So what I'm proposing is implementing training in how to avoid those, you know, messy transitions, or how to avoid having people not be able to process that information and deal with those problems in a way that is productive.
And
So
I'm saying it doesn't work because people have to go through the same developmental steps and stages.
No, it would work. So yeah, so there's a disconnect here where it would work if young people and people are taught this process, then they'd be able to avoid that situation, right? So the problem is, and why I'm excited to be talking about this, and you're asking a great question and bringing up a great point, is we're not addressing that issue. And that's what I'm trying to address. That's what my foundation is working on developing. That's when I talk to people, that's why I'm excited to talk about this, is you're describing the problem that happens. I've found a process that actually gets around that problem and deals with it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen. So I'd be excited to do a training with that group and help that organization avoid that problem. And if we work with young people, we're going to be teaching them before that becomes a problem. So that's the necessity, you know, like if we actually take the effort to train and teach and develop these skills, these fundamental skills, and this is the beauty of fundamentals, you become a multi-tool. If you have strong fundamentals, you're a Leatherman, you're a Swiss Army knife. You know, you're not this hyper specialized item that can do one thing, and when that job's done, you fight really hard to create another situation where you're useful. So what I propose and what I've been trying to develop with different people, and, you know, if this is a real story, you know, I'd love to talk to that organization and help them figure out a way to avoid having this medieval fiefdom, you know, where one king leaves, another king comes in, and it's Shakespeare. And you
Well,
know,
good luck.
And I know, and Tina, it definitely we've got lots to say there for sure. I want to make sure that we check in with folks. So I
Sure.
know that my mom had her hand up there, and so I will check in there. And I know a couple other people wanted to check in, so let's make sure we get there. And are you good, Tina? Yes, you moved. Okay. Excellent.
My husband just cut me off.
I cut her
yeah.
off
No,
because I was
we can
talking
agree
to
to
her.
disagree. I see your point, and
Yeah,
I love his theories. I just don't think it's realistic. It works.
Well, again, yes.
But
Thank
we can agree
you.
to disagree.
no, I love it. A good challenge is, it
Yeah.
just stokes me up even
That's
more.
okay.
So
We can agree to
that's
disagree.
fantastic.
Works for me.
Okay, we'll keep on. We've got a few more minutes of
Are you coming
of
back to the
Dylan's
States?
time.
And
He
Dylan, when
can't
are
come
you
back
coming?
to the States.
No,
If he comes in here, he has to quarantine for 2
when
months.
are you planning to come home? Come back to the States?
There's a lot of projects going on back home, and so the plan was to have been back already. But
Oh.
you know, with the COVID stuff, I'm just figuring out the timing. Hopefully
Yeah,
soon. There's a lot.
We'll see you in the fall.
Maybe you can come up, or we can continue.
There we go.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Michelle, do you want to unmute yourself? Perhaps, if I can find her. Maybe.
I had the same
There
problem.
we
that it?
go.
Is
Yes,
that it?
you're unmuted.
Okay, good. Well, Dylan, I can see that you are very passionate about what you have discovered, and that is really encouraging. And I'm curious, what I'm curious about the specifics of your model, and I'm also wondering who your teachers were that planted this enthusiasm and direction in you.
Um, Great question. The specifics, I think, with the time, I'm going to make, the slide deck available, and I'm always, my contact information. So anybody listening, I can only see so many faces at a time, but, I'm always available. My email will be available. Reach out. I'd love to have an ongoing conversation. I think that's where these things start. If we look at things as just, again, short little marketing slogans exchanged between people, we don't get anywhere. So I'm very open to conversations. The enthusiasm, I think a lot of it came from my parents, just, the way I grew up. My mom's an artist. My dad was a woodworker. We talked about, a lot. It was a lot of exploration. So that definitely planted an early seed. I had an opportunity to go to, I've had great teachers, my fourth grade teacher, I'm still very good friends with. I had an opportunity to go to a school for the last 2 years in my high school that was pretty impactful. And they really gave me an opportunity to dig into these things. The headmaster at the school, we'd have one-on-one meetings and we'd talk about, how to impact, have an impact on the world,
So I'm just curious, because the world is kind of harsh, as Tina was talking about. And I'm wondering, if a reference to an academic model, maybe that doesn't matter. I mean, I was trained as a mediator and did a lot of work in schools training kids to be, to do mediation. And of course they loved it. And was it sustainable? It was with them, but the teachers could not embrace all that new learning. And so, so I'm just,
that's the challenge, because I think we have to do better about accepting that maybe we won't see the change we want, but we have to be moving down that because it's a torch, and that's why it's so important when we make progress that we don't go backwards. When we get a foothold, we don't go back. We have to, because it takes so much time to have positive forward momentum, and it's so much easier when things go backwards. And so that's so important. And the world is a hard place, and there are going to be significant challenges that people face. And I just think that when we teach people how to really deal with them, they're going to get through it better. And there's no way to avoid an awful, it's going to come. That day when something bad happens, it's going to come. And we have to do a better job about preparing people to really deal with it and not just kick the can down the road.
Well, those are the most significant learning times, when the bad comes.
Yeah. And if you have the tools to be able to get through it, then you can really learn. If we don't give people the tools and people just bury things, or they compartmentalize them, or they run away, or they get overwhelmed, then that's a real problem. And so that's the goal, is to help people be able to deal with things better, because that requires a human development and not just learning a skill set, because there's a difference. There's some incredibly skilled people that when the wheels come off, they don't know what to do. And so how do we get people to be able to have that ability to really endure, and that's those qualities. We didn't get a chance to talk too much about that, but qualities like perseverance, we have to teach that. We have that ability, but you have to teach it.
You have to bring it out. And so you have like a curriculum.
Yeah, I have a human development model that I've been developing over the last 5 years. And, one of the big components, we use art, and so we incorporate it into different things, like change. Like I have a change management program that I've developed for kids to help them process change. I use art as a teaching tool. So not trying to teach kids how to be artists, but using art to teach them about engage, think, act, and give them exposure to the arts. Because if you're an artist, you'll find your way. And if you're not an artist, you can still love the arts. That's the big thing. I think a lot of people will, and I hear a lot, oh, I'm not an artist. That's okay. But you can still get a lot out of the arts. And so that's, we do different things like that. So the goal is to build is again, using the idea that everyone learns differently. We package the human development model into things that will be received effectively by people.
You hope. You
Yeah.
want.
Well, sure, you hope. And then you adjust, because the big thing about sustainable solutions is always adjusting. It doesn't mean that it's fixed perfectly, right? Like you always have to tinker and if you build a house, you got to change the roof at some point. And nothing lasts forever. So you got to upgrade and change and
Good.
Thanks. And Bridget also just has her hand up there. If you want to unmute yourself, we can catch you before the end of the hour here.
Hi. Hi, my name's Bridget McGinn. I work in New York City. I don't know you, but I was intrigued by the conversation and decided to join your presentation. I work in early childhood as an Italiarista, inspired by the work done in Reggio Emilia, Italy.
mm-hmm.
And I also share a lot of dialogue and study with colleagues in democratic schools. And so I feel very strongly that one of the problems with finding solutions
Mm-hmm.
is that we're trying to fix things that and add things or develop skills and all, human development because it was robbed of us when we were young. So how does it start? It really has to start in early childhood. Like even looking at what happened at the Capitol building being stormed, that was about people listening to an authority, and our school system is structured on an authoritarian approach. So how do we expect people to grow into adults if all of their examples of living and being, which is how I think we learn as human beings, we learn by living things, we don't learn by being taught them. I think that teaching and words like, just problem solving and all of that can be corrected if people would just take a mindset of how are we raising our children? And school is a problem because that's why, as the woman Tina before was saying, that's why we have adults who come in and decide to do it a whole new way, because they think that being successful means being the authority. Right. And so how do we, democratic education is amazing because when and also in young children, that's when they are developing. That's when their brain is developing its empathy, its ability to negotiate, its ability to honor differences. All of the things that our culture teaches that separate us are not in human beings when they're very little. We teach them that. So my question is, where do you see this in terms of human development and education and early childhood education and giving young people the experiences to understand how to be democratic? I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about, being able to talk with people and honor differences and collaborate and respect people's, alone time or whatever, all of these things. If young children don't experience it, then we're going to spend the rest of their adult lives figuring out all these new ways to fix it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm trying to get around the curve on. And that's why I work with the full spectrum of ages. I work with young kids, middle school, high school, adults, because you can't, we can't not think about people who maybe haven't learned something, when they were younger. So we have to get to them at some point when they're an invested learner. So my big thing is work with people when they're an invested learner, which means they're in a position to really want to learn what's being taught. And so early childhood development, I'm a big proponent of, because I think you're right. If you can get to a young person and, help develop those skills right away, why wait? It's
Well, it's not, but it's like it's just so adult centered. Like even when I worked training teachers in art and design education, right? So one of the, artists, you think that they would be the most flexible and open to new ways of doing things, right? But you know what happens no matter how progressive the kids are, the students are in their studies, in the papers they write and what they read and what turns them on. As soon as they're in a classroom full of kids, they become authoritarians because that's what they experience. So there's a really serious chain that has to be broken. And I think that your training is a really important place.
Oh, it's huge.
To begin, and it's a struggle. I mean, it's not been an easy career path training.
No,
people who have been raised to, that success means people listen to you and do what you say. And that's not actually the truth.
And then when you boil that down, because I've thought a lot about this just with my own interactions in schools and teachers and artists, and, and I think it applies to people will want to defend what they consider their space, and they want to defend, most importantly, their idea of themselves. And so when that is, I always cringed when I heard a student ask a teacher, why do I need to learn this? And the teacher got upset with the student for asking that, because I always thought, hey, that's a valid question. What do we all like value the most? It's our time, right? And little kids, we all want to know, hey, are we wasting our time here, man? What are we doing? So it
takes it back to our, we're culturally focused that the adult is the expert, and teachers are trained to be the expert, which I understand in, because if I'm really interested in learning about, astrophysics or whatever, I'm going to go find somebody who can tell me everything I need to know because I want to know. But younger people who are being forced fed information or classes, they develop, their intrinsic motivation is pushed aside, and everything's about how they get rewarded, and everything's about the adult. It's very hard. I think that structurally our schools are about teachers, and they're not supposed to be about teachers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard balance, because I think a lot of people I've spoken with, it comes from a place of, it can come from a place of feeling underappreciated. And so, I'm always trying to figure out what the factors on all sides are, right? Because I think that's how you solve the problem. And and I think part of it comes down to, and it's good to look for experts, but I think you have to earn that, right? Like, I think that too often an expert is considered an expert because they have a label or a name tag that says so. But I'm more looking for experts who have earned it. And question?
Oh, and I'm also just going to be sensitive to folks' time and to Dylan's time as well. So let's shoot. Michelle, you're still muted.
Dylan has to go to sleep.
I don't.
Can I just say one thing, because it's short and it's hopeful, is that, do you find, Dylan, that, I mean, it's been my experience anyway, as I work across the generations, that adults get old and die, and there are new,
Right on.
we've planted some seeds, and the younger generation is different than we are. I mean, look at the younger generation now.
Yeah.
I mean, in the pain and the joys that they've experienced, it's a different breed, and it's always that way. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot, I'm with college students now, and I think there's a lot of hope there because they have good teachers and they live in this
Other-
time.
Look, I think people are people. Kermit the Frog said that. And I just have always, that has always registered with me, because I think, you know, no matter what culture I was living in, where I've been, you know, there's always been a challenge. There's always going to be a challenge. There's going to be joy. There's going to be, you know, there's that spectrum of the human experience that we're going to go through. And it's going to be a little different for, you know, depending on the time you live in. But I think that if we focus on things that we can control, we're going to be more effective at living a fulfilling life. You know, we're going to be able to make sure that individuals and communities thrive if we focus on that root driver, and that's people. And that kind of ties all in to where the conversation started, right? You know, like, we're all problem solvers. We are all, you know, people. The fact that we are the catalyst of the outcome ultimately that we want. Like, a tool may get us there, but it's how we apply that tool. Information might give us insight, but it's how we analyze that information. You know, when we get to another community, or we need to look at, you know, a succession plan, you know, we can be forward thinking if we learn to think that way. You know, we have the ability to think, we have the ability to breathe, we have the ability to, you know, function in certain ways, but we have to learn how to use them all the way and max them out. You know, like right now, learning how to breathe more effectively is becoming really popular. Well, we all breathe, right? But we can be better at it. And if we can be better at breathing, we can be better at thinking. And if we're better at thinking, I believe we'll be better at living and, you know, getting to achieve those sustainable solutions. But thank you. If, you know, again, my contact information will be available. I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to continue the conversation at another time. Leah, thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you. And I look forward to meeting people in person.
Great, come
Yeah.
visit, we can argue.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for joining us tonight and staying up past
Nah,
perhaps perhaps maybe the usual time, but we really do. It's great to again have enthusiasm and have drive, and to watch people look for it in other people and do that development piece. That's been something that I've really enjoyed in this time, and working with you also. So there will be more from Dylan in the future. Stay tuned. And for our upcoming speaker series in February, we have two speakers. We have Ben Bacote, who will be speaking about his personal activism and his role in Black Lives Matter. He spoke a couple weeks ago about a specific time frame. And Tyler Ray, who is with the Granite State, or excuse me, the Granite Outdoor Alliance, talking about the environment that we have in New Hampshire, and how to better utilize it, along within those, you know, some of recreation, some economic, and definitely sustainable. So we're kind of on a roll there. Thank you all again so much for coming. And this presentation is recorded and viewable on our website, along with Dylan's slides. We can make those available, and his contact information. So thank you all again, and have a good evening.
Night, night.
Thank you, guys.
Good
Thank you, everybody.
night.